It's 3:19 on a Wednesday morning. Elliot Cross is sitting on the floor of his bathroom in Memphis, Tennessee. Not the bed, not the couch, the floor. The light is too bright. He hasn't turned it off. He's been here for an hour and 4 minutes, which he knows because his phone is in his hand and the screen keeps waking up. And each time it does, the timestamp reminds him that he is still here, still on the tile, still losing a war that nobody knows he's fighting. He is 33 years old. Former Division I wrestler. The kind of physical specimen 6'1", broad, carved by a decade of the most demanding individual sport that exists, who people assume does not have this problem. They are wrong. His problem is not his body. His problem is what lives inside it. What lives inside it is the thing he has been calling his darkness since he was 19. The specific internal weather that descends without warning, not depression exactly, not anxiety exactly, but the combination of both plus something colder and harder to name. A voice, an undertow, a force that does not announce itself and does not leave on request. He has been fighting it for 14 years. He is losing, not losing in the catastrophic sense. He is functional. He has a career business development, Atlanta-based firm, good numbers. He has people who love him. He has a life that, from the outside, reads as assembled and intact. But at 3:19 a.m. on a Wednesday in Memphis, sitting on a bathroom floor because the bed felt like a trap and the darkness had been louder than usual since Tuesday, he is losing in the only way that finally matters. He is fighting his demons instead of using them. He doesn't know that distinction yet. He doesn't know that what he has been calling his darkness, the force he has spent 14 years trying to suppress, manage, medicate, and outlast, is not his enemy. It is his undeployed army. He is about to find out. Before Elliot's story, before the framework, one thing needs to be dismantled directly. The standard conversation about internal darkness, about the difficult emotions, the hardwired tendencies, the psychological patterns that cause suffering, has one default instruction. Fix it, eliminate it, treat it, manage it down to silence. Build enough habits, enough discipline, enough external structure that the darkness never gets loud enough to matter. This sounds like health. In practice, it is war. And war on your own internal architecture is a conflict with no possible victor, because you are both sides. Every resource you deploy against the darkness comes from you. Every battle you win costs exactly as much as the battle cost. And the darkness, because it is not external, because it does not exist outside you but inside the deepest structures of who you are, is not depleted by the fighting. It is fed by it. Attention is energy. Resistance is attention. The force you resist with your full psychological weight does not shrink. It expands in proportion to the size of the resistance. This is not pessimism about human nature. This is the mechanism, the actual, operational, neurologically verified mechanism of how the mind handles internal threat. The Stoics understood this mechanism so precisely that they built their entire approach to difficult internal states around one foundational recognition: that the emotion, the darkness, the difficult impulse, none of it is inherently the problem. The problem is always the relationship to it, not what it is, what you do with it. And what most people do with it, what Elliot had been doing for 14 years, is exactly wrong. They fight it. The Stoics said, direct it. Elliot Cross had always had the darkness. He had first noticed it as a competitive advantage. At 16, training twice a day at a wrestling club in Memphis, under a coach who believed that the best athletes were the ones who could access something cold and focused and merciless. When the match demanded it, Elliot had found that the darkness gave him access. When it came, when the internal weather turned to that specific cold, the performance sharpened. The focus narrowed. The body went to work with a precision that his training alone didn't fully explain. His coach had noticed, called it his edge, said some athletes spent their whole career looking for what Elliot had naturally. He had not understood yet what he was actually carrying. By 19, the edge had become irregular. Sometimes it was the focus cold that won matches. Sometimes it was the other kind, the descending kind, the 3 a.m. kind, the kind that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with sitting in a place that felt smaller and darker than the room actually was. By 23, the two had become genuinely difficult to separate. The same internal force that sharpened him in competition was the same force that flattened him in the off-season. Same source, different contexts, wildly different outputs. He had tried the standard interventions, therapy 3 different therapists across 6 years, 2 of whom were good and 1 of whom was excellent, all of whom gave him frameworks that helped, and none of whom fully cracked the mechanism. Medication 1 trial that dulled the darkness, but dulled everything else along with it, which was its own form of loss. Exercise, he had never stopped training, and the training helped, but the darkness was not a physical thing, and physical solutions had physical limits. The last therapist, the excellent one, Dr. Renata Voss in Atlanta, had told him something that he had not been ready to hear at the time, but that was now. On the bathroom floor in Memphis at 3:19 a.m., arriving with the delayed force of things that were true before you were ready for them. She had said, "Elliot, I don't think the goal is to stop feeling this. I think the goal is to stop being surprised by it and start being strategic about it." Strategic. He had heard the word. He hadn't understood it yet. Not until the bathroom floor. Not until the book his brother had left in his guest room, a worn paperback copy of Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way, fell off the nightstand when he'd gotten up and followed him, somehow, to the bathroom. He picked the book up off the tile. He had started it 3 months earlier and put it down, not because it wasn't interesting, because it was interesting in a way that was asking something of him he hadn't been willing to give yet. He opened it at random. He was not looking for anything specific. He was on the floor of a bathroom at 3:19 a.m. The bar for what constituted useful was not high. He landed on a passage about Marcus Aurelius, about a man who, born into privilege, educated by the finest minds of his era, destined for the throne, had spent his entire life dealing with something that the historical record describes with unmistakable consistency as a profound, recurring internal suffering. Not just the external pressures of empire, the internal ones, headaches that incapacitated him, an iron constitution that his own accounts suggest was frequently at war with itself, the recurring melancholy that surfaces in meditations not as performance or philosophy, but as the lived texture of a man who had access to everything the world could provide and still found the interior weather difficult on regular mornings. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote about his darkness, not to defeat it. To understand what it was trying to do, Elliot read for 40 minutes on the bathroom floor. Not because the bathroom was comfortable, because he had run out of places to fight the darkness and decided, for the first time, to sit with it and listen to what it said. What it said surprised him. Here is what the Stoics understood about difficult internal states that most modern psychology took until the late 20th century to catch up to. Difficult emotions, anger, fear, grief, the cold darkness, the specific weight of shame or inadequacy are not errors in the system. They are signals. Highly compressed, evolutionarily ancient, neurologically primitive signals, transmitted from the oldest parts of the brain, the parts that predate language, that predate rational thought, that predate the capacity for reflection and arriving at the surface of consciousness in the specific form of feelings rather than words, because feeling is the only language those structures know. They are not your enemy. They are your oldest intelligence, poorly calibrated, sometimes, firing on patterns from decades ago that no longer match current circumstances, generating threat responses to situations that don't warrant them, loud in places that don't need the volume, but not random, not meaningless, not the malfunction that the fix-it framework implicitly treats them as. Every demon has a function. Every piece of internal darkness is pointing at something. The question the Stoics ask, the question that changes everything when you actually apply it, is not, how do I make this stop? It is, what is this pointing at? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The obstacle, converted to its own purposes, not eliminated, converted. The darkness is not the obstacle to the life you are trying to build. The darkness examined, understood, redirected is the fuel. Every person who has spent serious time with the Stoics, not reading them for inspiration, but actually studying the mechanism, eventually arrives at the same recognition. The Stoics had a category for the 4 primary difficult emotional states. They called them the pathi, the passions, or in modern translation, the disruptive emotions. Not all emotions. The four that consistently derail: fear, desire, pleasure, and distress. But beneath the category and the vocabulary is a more useful truth. Each difficult emotion, when examined honestly, is pointing at a value. And the value it is pointing at, the thing underneath the darkness, the signal beneath the noise, is almost always something that belongs at the center of a well-built life. Here are the four demons, and what they are actually trying to tell you. Demon 1, anger. Anger is the most misunderstood of the four. In the popular understanding, anger is a problem to be controlled, managed, suppressed, redirected into exercise, released in healthy ways. The Stoics had a sharper read. Seneca wrote an entire essay, De Ira, on anger, that is still the most precise dissection of the emotion ever produced. And his central recognition was this: anger always has a subject. It is never general. It always points with remarkable precision at a specific violation of a value you hold deeply. The man who is never angry about anything is not calm. He is indifferent. He does not care enough about anything to be violated by its betrayal. The man who is frequently angry, who carries the fire close to the surface, is a man with intense values and a broken system for expressing them. The demon is not the anger. The demon is the expression mechanism. The fuel is real. The direction of the fuel is the question. Elliot Cross, when the darkness came cold and hard, was almost always angry underneath it. Not visibly, not in ways he showed. But the internal texture was anger at circumstances, at his own limitations, at the distance between who he was and who he believed he could be. That anger was not a flaw. That anger was information. It was the signal from a man who cared intensely about his own growth and was frustrated by the gap. Redirect that signal. Give it a target that deserves it, a direction that channels it into force rather than dissipating it into suffering, and the darkness becomes the engine. Demon 2, fear. Fear, in the Stoic framework, is not cowardice. It is not weakness. Fear is the signal from a mind that has identified something it values and is calculating the probability of losing it. You cannot fear the loss of something you do not care about, which means the intensity of your fear is a map of your values. A precise, honest map, more honest than the one you draw deliberately, because it operates below the level of the self-editing your rational mind applies to your stated preferences. The man who is afraid of failing publicly is not vain. He is a man who cares deeply about his impact and his legacy. The man who is afraid of being abandoned is not weak. He is a man for whom genuine connection is one of the highest values in his life. The man who is afraid of wasted time is not neurotic. He is a man who understands at some level that the time is finite and what you do with it matters enormously. Your fear is showing you what you love. The Stoic practice is not to eliminate the fear. It is to examine it, premeditatio malorum, the deliberate contemplation of what you fear losing, and to use that examination to clarify what you are actually building your life around. The fear is a compass. It is pointing at what matters. Use it as such. Demon 3, grief and its relatives: shame, inadequacy, the weight of not enough. This is the one that sat on Elliot's bathroom floor at 3:19 a.m. The specific, cold heaviness of feeling insufficient. The gap between what you are and what you believe you should be, experienced not as motivation but as weight, as verdict. The Stoics were precise about this one. The grief, the shame, the inadequacy, they are almost never about the present. They are about a comparison, a gap between an ideal and a reality, a standard being applied to a current state, which means they contain, embedded in them, the precise information about the standard you are holding yourself to. And the standard, the demanding, unforgiving, exhausting standard, is not the problem. The problem is that you are using the standard as a verdict rather than a direction. The darkness that says you are not enough is, underneath the verdict, actually saying you are capable of more than this, and you know it. It is the gap between your current self and your possible self, experienced as pain rather than direction, because the relationship to the gap is wrong. Stop receiving it as a verdict. Start reading it as a map. The gap is not evidence of your inadequacy. It is the precise measurement of your potential. Demon 4. The restlessness, the relentless, driving hunger that never fully quiets. This is the demon that the productivity culture mistakes for ambition and the mental health culture mistakes for anxiety. It is neither. It is both. The restlessness, the inability to be fully satisfied, the feeling that there is always something else, something more, some further horizon that the current achievement doesn't reach is one of the most powerful forces available to any human being. And it is almost universally misdirected. The person who turns the restlessness against themselves, who uses it to find evidence of their own insufficiency, who feeds it with comparison in social media and the highlight reels of other people's progress is burning rocket fuel in a barbecue. The person who turns the restlessness toward their work, who channels the driving hunger into the specific, daily, unglamorous labor of building something that matters, has one of the most powerful engines available to human performance. Marcus Aurelius had this demon in abundance. The private journals are full of it, the dissatisfaction with himself, the relentless standard, the never fully settled quality of a mind that refused to stop examining itself. He did not try to quiet it. He aimed it. At the empire, at the philosophy, at the daily practice of becoming incrementally the person the standard demanded. The demon didn't leave. It built Rome. This is not a philosophical exercise. It is a specific, executable practice with a precise structure. Step 1. The examination named the demon precisely. Not, I feel bad. Not, the darkness is bad tonight. Exactly. Is it anger? Locate the specific violation. What value did reality fail to honor? Is it fear? Locate the specific threatened loss. What do you love that you are afraid of losing? Is it the cold weight of inadequacy? Locate the specific gap between what current state and what standard. Is it restlessness? Locate the specific direction it is pulling. Toward what? Away from what? Naming the demon precisely is not a meditation technique. It is the activation of the prefrontal cortex, the rational, planning, language-using part of the brain in response to an experience that is currently running through the amygdala without rational processing. Naming brings the demon into the rational system. The rational system can work with it. The reactive system cannot. This step takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes. No journal required, no therapist required. Just the honest, specific question. What exactly is this? Step 2. The translation, find the value the demon is pointing at. Once the demon is named, ask the translation question. What does the presence of this emotion tell me I care about? The anger tells you your values were violated, which means you have values worth defending. The fear tells you something matters, which means you are capable of mattering. The cold weight tells you the gap is visible, which means your standard is real and your potential is larger than your current state. The restlessness tells you there is more, which means you are not built for the ordinary. Translate the demon into the thing it is pointing at. Every time, without exception. Step 3. The deployment, give the demon a direction. This is the move that most people never make, and it is the only move that changes the relationship to the darkness permanently. Give the demon a specific, concrete, immediately available direction to move in. Not a vague intention, not a future goal. A specific action available right now or first thing tomorrow that deploys the energy the demon is generating toward the thing it is pointing at. The anger about the gap between your current work and the standard you hold, deploy it into the next 2 hours of focused, demanding work. Give the anger a target that deserves it. Let it sharpen the focus rather than corrode the interior. The fear of wasted time, deploy it into the single most important thing you have been avoiding. The fear is telling you it matters. Act like it. The cold weight of inadequacy, deploy it into the specific, smallest possible action that closes the gap by 1 millimeter. Not the whole gap. 1 millimeter. The weight cannot survive motion in the right direction. The restlessness, deploy it toward the work that has been waiting longest and asking loudest. Stop feeding it with comparison. Point it at the horizon it's actually built to reach. Step 4. The review, close the loop. At the end of the day, the Stoic evening review applies directly to the demon practice. One question. Did I let the demon work for me today, or did it work against me? Not a verdict, a diagnostic. If it worked for you, how? What specifically happened when you named it, translated it, and deployed it? If it worked against you, at what point did the redirect fail? What would you do differently tomorrow? The review builds the metacognition that makes the practice faster over time. What takes 40 minutes the first time takes 4 minutes after 30 days. What takes 4 minutes after 30 days takes 40 seconds after a year. The demon becomes, over time, not a disruption but a signal. Not a thing that arrives and takes over, but a thing that arrives and you already know what to do with. Here is what the research says about the suppression model and why it confirms what the Stoics observed. A foundational series of studies by Stanford psychologist James Gross, beginning in the 1990s and continuing across 3 decades of research, established what is now one of the most replicated findings in emotion regulation science. Emotional suppression, the deliberate attempt to inhibit or hide an emotional experience, does not reduce the emotional experience. It amplifies it. Gross's studies showed that participants instructed to suppress their emotional response to distressing stimuli reported lower expressed emotion, but showed higher physiological arousal than participants who were not instructed to suppress. The suppression was successful on the surface. The emotion was running harder underneath. More significantly, suppression was associated with higher long-term negative affect, reduced memory for the suppressed events, increased cardiovascular stress responses, and most relevant to Elliot's experience, reduced relationship quality. Because the energy required to maintain suppression depletes the resources available for genuine connection and presence. The science is unambiguous. Suppression is expensive, and it doesn't work. What the research identifies as the most effective emotion regulation strategy is reappraisal, the cognitive process of changing the meaning assigned to an emotional event rather than suppressing the event itself, which is, in neurological vocabulary, exactly what the Stoic demon translation practice is doing. Not stop feeling this. Reappraise what this means. The anger is not a malfunction. It is data about values. The fear is not weakness. It is evidence of what you love. The cold wait is not a verdict. It is a map of the gap between current and possible. Reappraisal studies consistently show lower cardiovascular reactivity, higher long-term well-being, better social functioning, and most directly relevant, the ability to use emotional intensity as fuel for motivated behavior, rather than having it work against performance. The Stoics called this a loiosis transformation, not of the emotion, of the relationship to it. Same darkness, different architecture, completely different output. Here is the thing that the fix your demons culture cannot say, and the Stoics could. The people who have made the most significant contributions to human progress in art, in science, in philosophy, in any field that requires the particular quality of work that only comes from someone who cares more than is comfortable, are with remarkable consistency people who are carrying significant internal darkness, not despite the darkness, because of it, not because suffering is required for greatness. That is the romantic version of this observation, and it is wrong, and it has caused a significant amount of unnecessary suffering in people who believe they needed to maintain their pain, to maintain their edge. Because the darkness, in the people who learned to use it, was generating energy at a rate that ordinary contentment does not match. The anger about the gap, the fear of irrelevance, the restlessness that could not be satisfied with comfortable, the cold weight that said you are capable of more relentless, unquieting, impossible to bargain with. These are not comfortable states. They are powerful ones. The Stoics were not teaching you to become comfortable with your darkness. They were teaching you to stop wasting it. Seneca wrote, per aspera ad astra, through hardship to the stars, not endure hardship and eventually it ends and then you reach the stars. Through it. The hardship is the path. The darkness is the road. The man who has learned to make his demons work for him is not less affected by them. He is more powerful because of them. He has taken the most intensive internal energy source available to him, the compressed, volatile, demanding force of his most difficult emotional states, and given it a direction that matches its intensity. The demon does not rest. Neither does he. Here is the shape of it in 3 real examples, because the principle needs to land in real lives rather than remain abstract. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, philosopher, the most powerful man in his world, spent his reign in almost constant internal suffering. The Meditations are not a document of a serene man. They are the working notes of a man fighting every day to keep his darkness aimed in the right direction. His demons were the engine of one of the most sustained examples of principled leadership in recorded history. He did not overcome them. He employed them. Frederick Douglass, born into slavery, denied literacy by law, subjected to violence that would have broken most people's connection to the possibility of their own dignity, described his anger not as something he suppressed, but as something he used. His own accounts of the abolitionist work he did describe a man who had taken 14 years of accumulated injustice and directed it with surgical precision into every speech, every essay, every act of testimony. The anger was not incidental to the work. The anger was the work's fuel. Every exceptional athlete you have ever admired who competed in an individual sport, wrestling, boxing, tennis, swimming, has described in some form the same experience. The internal intensity that can go either direction, that can flatten them in a hotel room the night before a match, or sharpen them to a point that their opponent cannot match. The difference between the two directions is almost never talent. It is the relationship to the demon. The capacity to look at what's running in the interior and say, I know what this is. I know what it's pointing at. And I know exactly where to send it. Elliot Cross had been a Division I wrestler. He already knew how to use this. He had just forgotten that the tool worked off the mat too. Elliot got up off the bathroom floor at 4:33 a.m. Not because the darkness left. It hadn't. Because he had spent an hour and 14 minutes doing something he had never done before, examining the darkness instead of fighting it. He had asked it, for the first time, what it was pointing at. What he found underneath the cold weight was familiar. A man who had spent 14 years believing he was not enough. A standard so high it was genuinely difficult to approach. A gap between who he was and who he believed he was capable of, being experienced as verdict rather than direction. He wrote 3 words on the notes app of his phone at 4:33 a.m. Name it, use it. He did not become a different person that morning. He did not emerge from the bathroom floor transformed. But something structural changed. Something in the architecture of his relationship to the darkness shifted from opposition to interrogation. He started practicing the examination. Not every time, the darkness doesn't always announce itself with enough lead time for deliberate practice. But when it did, when he caught it arriving, when he felt the shift in internal weather, he asked the question, what is this pointing at? The answer was almost always the same, the gap. The distance between the man he was and the man he intended to become. And the gap, instead of sitting on his chest as a verdict, became the direction of the next action. Dr. Voss had told him, be strategic about it. This was what strategic meant. Not against the darkness, through it, with it, deployed. 3 months later, he told his brother, the one who had left the book, that the darkness still came. But it works for me now, he said. His brother didn't fully understand what that meant, but Elliot did, and that was enough. Marcus Aurelius did not die free of his demons. The historical record, his own writing, the accounts of those around him makes this clear. The internal suffering was present in his first years on the throne and in his last. The darkness did not relent because he had built a philosophy around it. What the philosophy gave him was not the end of the darkness. It gave him the practice of using it. Every morning in the private journal, in the deliberate direction of attention, in the daily act of taking the internal weather and asking what it was for and where to send it, he did what Elliot Cross did at 4:33 a.m. on a bathroom floor in Memphis. He interrogated the demon. He translated the signal. He deployed the energy. Not perfectly, not without failure, not without the days when the darkness won and the journal entries that night read like the working notes of a man who is losing ground and knows it. But the practice held. And the empire that ran on a philosopher king's philosophy, the most examined, most deliberate, most internally scrutinized mind in Roman history, produced something that has outlasted every critic, every enemy, every catastrophe that came for it. Because the man at its center had learned the most important thing the Stoics ever taught: your worst internal force is your most powerful, unused resource. The demon is not your enemy. It is your undeployed army. Deploy it. Before you close this video, I want you to find the demon that is currently the loudest. Not the one you're most comfortable talking about. The one that is actually running your life right now, the anger, the fear, the cold weight, the restlessness that will not quiet. Ask it the question, not how do I make you stop? What are you pointing at? Sit with the answer. Don't rush it. The answer will come if you give it space, because the darkness has been trying to tell you something for longer than you've been willing to listen. Find the value underneath. Find the signal beneath the noise. Find the thing that the most difficult part of your interior is actually trying to protect or build or reach, and then give it a direction. One specific, concrete, immediately available action that deploys the energy in the direction the demon is pointing. Not tomorrow, now, or first thing in the morning. The Stoics did not promise you a life without demons. They promised you a life where the demons were employed. Put them to work. If this reached something real, if something in you recognized the bathroom floor, or the cold 3 a.m., or the 14 years of fighting, what you could have been using, share this with someone who is still fighting theirs. Subscribe if you want more, not for the numbers, because the demons you've been carrying longest are the ones with the most to offer. Go find out what they're pointing at.